My husband Ethan and I had recently moved to a quiet suburban town after years of living in the city. We longed for a peaceful life surrounded by nature, a place where we could slow down and truly enjoy the little things. But more than anything, we dreamed of having a child to make our family complete. We had been trying for years, but each failed attempt left a deeper scar on my heart. No matter how hard I tried to stay positive, the pain of unfulfilled hopes lingered. Ethan, always the caring and supportive husband, did everything he could to lift my spirits, but there was always a void we couldn't seem to fill. One afternoon, while out running errands, we passed by an animal rescue center. Ethan suddenly turned to me with a spark in his eyes. "What if we adopt a dog?" he suggested. "Maybe having a furry companion around will bring some warmth to our home." At first, I wasn't sure, but something about the idea felt right, like a small step toward healing. So, we decided to stop by and take a look. As we walked through the shelter, surrounded by barking and wagging tails, my eyes were drawn to a corner where a German shepherd sat quietly. Unlike the other dogs jumping excitedly at the sight of visitors, this one remained still. His fur was a mix of gray and black, and his deep, sorrowful eyes seemed to hold a story no one had told. I knelt down, hesitantly reaching out my hand. The dog studied me for a moment before slowly moving closer, pressing his head gently into my palm. My heart clenched at the gesture. A shelter worker smiled as she approached. "Looks like you've caught Max's attention. That's rare. He doesn't usually warm up to people so quickly." Curious, I asked about his past. That's when I learned that Max was no ordinary dog. He was once a hero. At first, Max was still reserved, observing us cautiously as he adjusted to his new home. He would follow Ethan and me at a distance, never fully letting his guard down. But slowly, day by day, he started to change. Every morning, Ethan took Max for a run around the lake, and every afternoon, I would sit with him in the garden, pouring my heart out. I told him about my worries, about the countless failed pregnancy attempts, about how no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't seem to have a child. It had become an unspoken wound between Ethan and me, one that we carried in silence. Max never spoke, but he listened. On nights when I lay awake, overwhelmed with sadness, he would quietly rest his head on my lap, his warm eyes filled with understanding. It felt as if he was telling me, "You are not alone. I am here." His presence became a comfort, a quiet strength that kept me from breaking. But happiness never lasts for too long. One evening, while taking Max for a walk, I suddenly felt lightheaded. Before I could react, the world spun around me and darkness took over. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, Ethan sitting anxiously by my side. The doctor told me I had collapsed due to exhaustion and prolonged stress. Ethan tried to be strong for me, but I could see the fear in his eyes. That night, as we sat in silence on the porch, Max suddenly trotted up to us, carrying something in his mouth. He gently placed it at my feet, a small tattered doll. Its fabric was worn, its edges frayed, but it still held the shape of a tiny baby. I stared at it in shock. Where had he found this? Had it once belonged to a child who had loved him before he was abandoned? Or had he picked it up somewhere, sensing the longing in my heart? Tears welled up in my eyes as I reached for Max, wrapping my arms around him. He let out a soft sigh, resting his head against me. "Max, I wish for a child too," I whispered, my voice breaking. Ethan placed a hand on my shoulder, and for the first time in a long while, we held on to each other, letting the weight of our pain settle between us. And there, in the quiet night, with Max beside us, I realized we were already a family. After that night, something changed. Max was no longer just a dog we had adopted, he had become family. At first, Ethan and I tried to keep some boundaries. We had set up a cozy bed for Max in the living room, thinking he'd be comfortable there. But every night, without fail, he would quietly push open our bedroom door, circle the bed, and finally curl up on the floor next to us. The first few times, Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. Looks like someone doesn't like sleeping alone. But eventually, we stopped trying to keep him out. Some nights, I would wake up to find Max lying beside me, his head resting gently on the edge of the bed, his soft breathing a steady rhythm in the dark. On colder nights, he would nudge closer, seeking warmth, and I would instinctively drape a blanket over him. It became a comforting routine. The house, once feeling a little too big, now felt full. During the day, Max followed Ethan everywhere, helping him with yard work, lying under his desk when he worked from home. And in the evenings, he stayed by my side in the kitchen, watching me cook as if waiting for me to share a secret. We no longer felt the emptiness as sharply as before. One rainy night, as thunder rumbled outside, Max hopped up onto our bed without hesitation, settling himself right between Ethan and me. I expected Ethan to protest, but instead, he just sighed, giving in. "Guess this is our life now," he muttered, pulling the covers over both me and Max. I smiled, reaching out to scratch behind Max's ear. "Yes," I whispered. "This is our family now." And for the first time in a long while, I felt truly at peace. After days of stress and exhaustion, we decided we needed a break. A getaway, just the three of us. We had planned this trip for weeks, checking the routes, booking a cozy cabin by the lake, and making sure everything was perfect. Ethan and I needed this, and Max, he was just as excited as we were. The moment we packed our bags, his tail wagged furiously, and he refused to leave our side. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape, a chance to breathe, to reconnect, to momentarily forget about the struggles we had been facing. But fate had other plans. The unexpected storm. The road twisted through the mountains, offering breathtaking views of endless forests and misty peaks. Ethan was at the wheel, humming to the radio, while Max sat in the back seat, his head between us, watching the world pass by. I reached over and placed my hand on Ethan's. "This feels nice, doesn't it?" I smiled. "Yeah," he nodded, squeezing my fingers. "We needed this." But as we climbed higher, the weather shifted. The sky, which had been cloudy but calm, darkened within minutes. The wind picked up, and a thick fog settled over the road like an eerie blanket. Then came the rain, light at first, then turning into a relentless downpour. "This wasn't in the forecast," I muttered, checking my phone. Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel. "We should have turned back earlier." The road became treacherous. Water gushed down from the slopes, creating slick, muddy patches. The tires struggled for traction, and every sharp turn sent a jolt of fear through my chest. Then it happened. The road, already slippery, suddenly dipped into a steep curve. A massive gust of wind rocked the car just as Ethan turned the wheel. The tires lost grip. I barely had time to scream before the world flipped upside down. The car skidded off the edge, tumbling down the slope. My body jerked violently against the seatbelt. Glass shattered, metal groaned. Pain exploded in my side as we crashed through the undergrowth. And then, silence. The darkness. I drifted in and out of consciousness. My body felt heavy, pinned beneath something. Rain poured through the shattered windshield, drenching my face. The cold seeped into my skin. I turned my head, ignoring the sharp pain slicing through my skull. "Ethan!" My voice barely came out. He was slumped over the wheel, motionless. Blood dripped from his temple. Panic surged through me. "No, no, no." Then a movement. "Max!" Through the broken glass, I saw him struggling free from the wreckage. His fur was slick with rain, his legs trembling, but his eyes burned with determination. "Max!" I whimpered. He turned to me, sniffed Ethan, then let out a low, urgent whine. He understood. We needed help, and then he was gone. The rescue. I don't remember much after that. Just the rain, the cold, the fear. When I woke up again, I was in a hospital bed, my body wrapped in bandages. The beeping of machines echoed in the quiet room. Then I saw Ethan. He was sitting in a chair beside me, his head wrapped in gauze, his arm in a sling. His tired eyes met mine, and in them, I saw relief. "We're okay," he whispered. Tears blurred my vision. "How?" Before he could answer, the door creaked open. A man in a rescue uniform stepped inside, removing his cap. "I thought you'd want to know about your dog." Ethan and I exchanged a glance before turning back to him. "Max?" I choked out. The man smiled, shaking his head in disbelief. "I've seen smart dogs, but what your boy did, that's something else." The miracle of Max. The rescuer began to recount what had happened. After the crash, Max had fought his way through the storm, climbing back up the muddy slope, slipping and falling multiple times, but never giving up. His paws were torn from the sharp rocks, his body exhausted, but he pushed forward. When he finally reached the road, he didn't stop to rest. He positioned himself in the middle of the highway, drenched and shivering, refusing to move. A truck approached, honking furiously, but Max stood his ground. The driver slammed the brakes, barely stopping in time. Furious at first, the man stepped out, only to see Max frantically barking and running back toward the slope. Curious and concerned, the driver followed, and that's when he saw it. The wreckage, barely visible through the trees. Max led the rescuers straight to us. "If it weren't for him," the man finished, shaking his head, "we might not have found you two in time." I swallowed hard, tears rolling down my cheeks. "Where is he?" I whispered. The rescuer smiled. "He's right outside. He refused to leave the hospital doors. Wouldn't let anyone take him home without you." Ethan and I didn't wait another second. The moment I stepped outside, I saw him. Max. His fur was matted with dried blood, his legs wrapped in thick bandages. One of his ears had a deep cut, and his breathing was heavy, as if every inhale pained him. The sight of him broke me. "Oh, Max!" I choked out, rushing to my knees. His tail gave a weak thump against the ground at the sound of my voice. Despite his exhaustion, his body trembled as he struggled to stand. His eyes, filled with love and relief, locked onto mine. Ethan knelt beside me, his voice thick with emotion. "Look at you, buddy. You shouldn't have gone through all that alone." A nurse standing nearby spoke up, her voice gentle. "He never left the hospital doors. He was in terrible shape when he arrived, but he refused to rest. He just kept waiting. Every time someone walked by, he perked up, hoping it was you two." Tears burned my eyes. I reached out and pulled Max into my arms, feeling his heartbeat, slow but steady. He let out a soft whimper and nestled his head against my chest. "How bad is it?" I whispered, looking up at the nurse. "He's been through hell," she admitted. His paws were torn up from the rough terrain, and he had multiple wounds from breaking free of the wreck. We couldn't just stand by and do nothing, so the doctors treated him as best they could. He should heal, but he needs rest. A lot of it. I looked down at Max, my vision blurred with tears. "Why would you do this for us, huh? Why risk everything?" Max let out a tired but content sigh as if saying, "Because you're my family." Ethan stroked his head gently. "You saved us, buddy. We owe you everything." That night, when we finally made it home, Max did something he had never done before. Instead of curling up at the foot of the bed, he dragged his battered body up beside us, pressing himself between Ethan and me. He let out another deep sigh, as if reassuring himself that we were still here, that we were safe. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Max wasn't just our dog, he was our guardian, our family, our miracle. Weeks passed, and life slowly returned to normal. Max healed, though the scars on his body remained, a permanent reminder of the night he saved us. But he didn't seem to mind. Every morning, he still greeted us with a wagging tail, and every night he still curled up beside our bed, as if afraid to let us out of his sight again. Then one morning, everything changed. I stood in the bathroom, my hands trembling as I stared at the test in my hands. My breath hitched. Positive. Tears welled up in my eyes as my heart pounded in my chest. After years of longing, after so many heartbreaks, the impossible had happened. "Ethan!" I called, my voice shaking. He rushed in, concern flashing across his face. "What's wrong?" I couldn't speak. I just held up the test, my lip quivering. For a moment, he froze. Then realization dawned in his eyes. His expression crumbled as he let out a shaky breath. "Are you?" I nodded, unable to hold back the tears. "We're having a baby." Ethan pulled me into his arms, his body shaking against mine. Laughter mixed with sobs as we held on to each other, overwhelmed by the miracle we never thought we'd have. Then, as if sensing the joy in the room, Max trotted in, tilting his head curiously. "Max," I whispered, kneeling down to stroke his face. "You're going to be a big brother." His ears perked up, and for a moment it was as if he understood. He let out a soft huff, then pressed his nose gently against my stomach, his warm breath tickling my skin. I let out a small laugh, wiping my tears. Ethan crouched beside me, ruffling Max's fur. "You brought us home that night, buddy, and now you've helped bring us here, to this moment." Max simply wagged his tail, content. And in that moment, I realized something. Miracles don't always come the way we expect. Sometimes they come on four legs, with a wagging tail and eyes that see straight into your soul. And sometimes, just when you think you've lost all hope, life finds a way to surprise you. As I sat on our porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Max lay beside me, his head resting gently against my growing belly. His breathing was steady, his presence warm and comforting, just as it had been from the moment he entered our lives. I reached down, running my fingers through his fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. "You were meant to find us, weren't you, Max?" I whispered. Ethan sat beside us, placing a hand over mine. "Or maybe we were meant to find each other." I smiled, my eyes misty with emotion. Life had tested us, broken us, and yet, in the midst of it all, Max had been our constant. A guardian, a friend, a silent promise that we were never alone. From the moment he stepped into our home, he had done more than just fill the empty spaces in our hearts. He had led us to love, to hope, and ultimately, to the miracle we had been waiting for. And as the evening breeze carried the sound of Max's gentle sigh through the quiet air, I knew one thing for certain. Some souls don't just walk into our lives, they were sent, and Max, he was our greatest gift of all.